coming into the end of February, it was quite quiet. Our phones were very quiet. And there was some conferences in January and February that we attended. And again, not a lot of great sentiment in the space, a little bit of nervousness. And sometimes when it gets darkest, right before it gets a turnaround, right? And for us, coming or mid-April here, I'd say the beginning of March, our phones started ringing off the hook.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and excited to take a look inside some of the things happening in the silver world. Joined by Dan Dickson of Endeavour Silver, one of the larger silver producers out there, and about to get a bit larger towards the end of this year as they have a mine under construction, which, given the numbers we see about the silver supply and demand, I think will certainly come in handy. And nice timing on when it is coming in. Because Dan, we're in the middle of quite a gold and silver rally, the likes of which I think we're close to making it safe to say, I don't know if I've seen something quite like this since 2011, but we will cover all of that. And first of all, welcome on in. And how's everything going with you today?
Everything's going very well. Thanks for having me. It's nice seeing you again. And yeah, it's been an interesting last 6 weeks, I'd say. And absolutely, since 2011, I think a little bit in COVID at the start of March of 2020, with a lot of uncertainty, we saw that run in gold, not necessarily as much in silver. Now silver's kind of picked up, so it's been a interesting last, like I say, 6 weeks in the marketplace.
Yeah, it sure has been. And we are recording on Tuesday afternoon here in East Coast time. We see gold back over 2,400, silver down on the day on Tuesday, about 2,840 yet. Dan, one of the things that seems like a big difference to me is how we're seeing even the rally continue. Banks get short, doesn't matter. Labor report comes out strong. It's almost like a lot of this is happening in face of the data, which is certainly something we haven't seen much of in these past couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, it's been resilient from a gold standpoint, that's for sure. And I think it's a function of all the data that we're seeing is coming out of the western side of the world, and US and Canada, or our state, Canada, here in Vancouver. But the I think ultimately it's coming. It's a function of what's happening in Asia and Europe, and that's where a lot of the buying was coming from the central banks. I think now, just on the U.S. side of the world, people are getting back into the story of gold, and ultimately silver will follow, and it'll lag a bit, and it lagged. Now it's shot up, but I think there's still a long ways to go from a gold standpoint, and ultimately a silver standpoint. So, like I say, it's been a really interesting last 6 weeks.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that at some of the conferences that you've been to, you've started to see a little bit more fund participation in silver, more interest in the miners. I'm going to pull up, this is our ETFs, also includes the COMEX, and we see there's been metal flowing out of there constantly for the better part of the last couple of years, has spiked up recently. And I know you also are in contact with banks in terms of the financing of some of the projects you're doing. Anything you could share there in terms of what you're seeing on the institutional side right now?
Yeah, I'd say again, coming into the end of February, it was quite quiet. Our phones were very quiet. And there was some conferences in January and February that we attended. And again, not a lot of great sentiment in the space, a little bit of nervousness. And sometimes when it gets darkest, right before it gets a turnaround, right? And for us, coming or mid-April here, I'd say the beginning of March, our phones started ringing off the hook, partly with the Endeavour story. Like, we had really come out and we'd come down in share price. We were one of the worst performing share prices in our peer group, and it's an unfortunate thing, but I think there was a lot of story around that. It was where silver price was going, the costs and the margins that we saw in Mexico, the appreciation of the Mexican peso, which increased our costs. But ultimately, we've seen that turn around. I think a lot of the funds start to recognize the value that was sitting in Endeavour, and we got as low as $1.45 US per share. I think we're just shy of $3, or maybe we're saying about $2.60 today. So we had a significant run, and that's all in the last 6 weeks. Funds started calling, like I say, coming out of February, early March, and I've been on the phone for the last 6 weeks, almost 2-3 hours a day, with different people trying to get into or understand the Endeavour story. And some people were familiar that Terronera was coming online, some weren't. And so Like I say, guys that are starting to get caught up to speed with the silver, and then ultimately Endeavour story have been interested in the last 6 weeks. So it's been very positive in that sense. Um, Hopefully it continues. My expectation is it will, but you never know.
Yes, I know what you mean. In fact, I've been somewhat surprised we haven't seen more of a pullback along the way so far. Although, in the meantime, as that's happening, I mean, certainly a lot of banks beginning to talk a lot about gold and silver. Citi had a report out talking about a scenario in which they see $3,000 gold.
Yeah.
Here is Bank of America that gave an update on their gold and silver targets. Accordingly, we see yellow metal to rally to 3,000 by 2025. Silver prices could go above $30. So certainly a change in the environment. There's Goldman raising the price target. I guess at some level that begins to flow over to the actual funds and what the customers are doing. And certainly, as I know you're well aware, a lot of money coming into silver can make a big jump in a short period of time.
Yeah, I think from a silver standpoint, it's such a small market, and as you've shown, like if gold gets to 3,000, I know it had $30 on that report, but that's a ratio of 100 to 1. In the bull market, that ratio will be a lot tighter than 100 to 1. And historically, over the last 35 years, I think I've talked about this before. The average is the ratios average 65 to 1. Right now, we're probably sitting around 83, 82. So if we see gold move through 2,400 and up to 2,700 or even 3,000, I mean, I think that means silver runs well through $30, and that's just based on the ratio tightening up to the 65 to 1, and we've seen in other markets, and it's cyclical. Ultimately, that will tighten below 65 to 1, get 50 to 1. So with the $3,000 gold price and a 51, you're talking $60 silver, which means we're making all-time new highs, because historically back to 2011 that you touched on, silver touched $50 intraday, $48 at close of day. So we haven't come close to that. Gold's obviously making new highs, but silver's not there yet. And I think silver's transitioning from being a base metal, trading as a base metal, going back to that monetary aspect and trading as a precious metal. That's when we'll see it kind of run. There's a lot smaller supply side now for monetary aspects as opposed to the industrial component. And silver has exploded for solar panels and electrification, greenification. And so there's a smaller piece of the pie that's going to be available from a monetary standpoint, which again, it's positive for the price of silver when we really see it move in that direction to be deemed to be a precious metals, which will happen. It'll come again.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're mentioning there because you have that dynamic between the monetary and the industrial, which don't know if you saw this, but there was a study by Oxford Economics where they were doing a forecast for what they expect silver industrial demand over the next 10 years, which again, I get it, a lot can happen in 10 years, but they forecasted a doubling of the growth in industrial, so 46% over
Yeah.
the next decade, which obviously, if we have a spark in monetary demand at somewhere in that same time, leaves for a little bit of a gap. And did you have a comment there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the data shows that, and that's the growth from an industrial standpoint is still there, and that's happening. And whether it's 10 years or 15 years, I'm always a little bit more pessimistic with how fast we can move to greenification, how fast we move into electric vehicles. Just across the world, I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as some say. And I know as we want it to. And of course, we need to reduce carbon and the carbon footprint that we put out, but that takes time. And I don't think it happens immediately or as fast as some of the establishment wants. But it's happening. And so that growth from an industrial standpoint just means that pie is going to be smaller. On the supply side of things, the impact to actually get mines discovered and through permitting taking longer and longer and longer. There hasn't been a big inflow of capital into the exploration side of things over the last 10 years. So new mines and new supply coming on stream from a silver standpoint won't be able to fill that gap that's happening from a demand standpoint. So like I say, everything's kind of coming to an inflection point. we're at a pinch point coming up here where there can be a very positive movement in the price of silver for all the things that we've already talked about.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, I was watching an interview you did at the PDAC conference earlier today, and it made me chuckle when you said people are saying, well, there's a deficit in the silver market. How come the price hasn't risen? Which I get it. We're not at 2011 or 1980 highs yet. We have gone up $10 from the fall of 2022. So I think we're seeing that impacted somewhat. And I mean, we also had TD Securities. They actually wrote a report a couple of weeks ago talking about the next silver squeeze, citing the same things with the deficits, and also makes you wonder, especially even if we had $50 silver for the next 5 years, at least based on the deficit numbers we're seeing, how much additional production, if you're just guessing, even if we had that $50 level and executives felt that was going to be the sustained price, that still would require, if we're getting 100, 200 million ounce deficits, do you think we would be able to meet that even if we were at those levels?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because silver as a primary metal only comes as a primary source of revenue out of mines. Only 30% of the silver that's produced actually comes from a mine that's primary silver. And of course, at $50 silver, there's a lot of the mines that have closed. You can expand operations, go into other areas of your mines. So there'll be some that comes online. I think part of that goes from a base metal standpoint, like copper prices. What's copper price doing? Because and gold price, which obviously in that scenario, I think would also be a lot higher. In 2011, 2012 range, I think production kind of peaked out at 900, 950 million ounces of silver. So I think you could probably get, if you're sitting at $50 silver, and again, I'm just kind of speculating here, but you go from 800 million ounces produced on an annualized basis to maybe the 900, 950. So almost kind of a 20% increase there. But I don't think that offsets if silver's sitting at 50. You've got to get money into the ground from an exploration standpoint, development standpoint to kind of fill that deficit. I know last year, I think it was Metal Focus had about a 200 million ounce deficit. The year before that, it was similar. That I feel coming off ETFs and what's above ground. Yeah. So we can fill maybe 100 million, 150 million, and not short order, but relatively short order. So call it 3 to 5 years. It just shows that there's still a massive shortfall in that space if we do end up there. So hopefully we can sustain those prices for a bit. Again, the thing that's very difficult to kind of pinpoint is what's the monetary demand, what's governments doing from budgets, how much deficits are we running in developed countries. Those continue to grow. We got in Canada today, we have our the budget announcement by our government. Expectations are low here, sitting right at my desk, unfortunately, but there's so many variables that go into that from a monetary standpoint. It's difficult to project. But like I say, we try to position ourselves so that it's going to be a higher price. We have a great pipeline in our portfolio behind even Terronera that we think we can take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I guess the one easy part in there to forecast is that the debt loads are going to continue increasing, and we'll leave aside the whole Fed circus for today. But one last thing before we turn over to Endeavour that I wanted to run by you, because this was Peter Kraut talking about a conversation he had with a silver mining company up at PDAC. Love to get your thoughts on this and anything else along those lines maybe you've been hearing. So let me play that here.
I was at PDAC just a few days ago at Investor Forum, and I spoke to someone who runs a large silver producer, not in North America, and they sell their product out to China and to the West. And he told me, he said, our sales to China, or our sales period, are so tight. The buyers are coming to us and are saying, can we have it? Can we have the product? They're willing to pay a couple of weeks in advance of delivery. And they are willing to, in China, they're willing to pay $3 over spot to get the silver. So the markets are very tight, and it doesn't matter. I think maybe what we see.
So we'll stop that there. But I know obviously you've withheld silver at certain points,
Yeah.
and curious any reaction you have to what Peter said, and also if you've been hearing from companies directly or anything that you could share along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we don't sell specifically right into China. I sell we produce a Dory bar out of Guanaceví that gets refined and becomes 999 silver that we sell through exchanges here in North America. Then our concentrate actually gets sold to traders. It ultimately gets mixed in Mexico and sent overseas. Um, I've heard of not just silver price, but obviously the gold price is a premium right now, and expect for the last couple of months in China for gold. We expected that to come from a silver standpoint. We've heard, I haven't heard as high as $3, but definitely a premium, and that's great. I think it speaks to exactly what's happening, and it kind of touched on early on is Asia had been running and central bank purchases of gold, and Asia really being the purchasers and driving that price despite some of the data points that were coming out of the US. And I think that's completely true. And I don't doubt that there's a premium there. I think eventually that premium makes its way to North America because our financial world's phenomenal at kind of arbing that stuff and taking that away. So I think that will show up. As you touched on, it's a $10 increase in silver over the last kind of 6-7 months. So I imagine that's tightening up, but it speaks to the whole complex that we're in right now, and that higher prices are coming. And I think it will continue that what we've seen over the last 6-7 weeks.
Yeah, it certainly sets up for an interesting couple of years ahead to see how that all gets resolved. And fortunately, in those years ahead, one of the things that will be happening is you're on track to turn on the Terronera mine. And it's great to go there and see it in person as you're in the early stages of construction back in November of last year. But perhaps you
Yeah.
could give people an update on how things have progressed since then and still the timeline going forward.
Yeah, November seems like a long time ago. Things have gone extremely well, to be honest. I mean, obviously the biggest part for Endeavour is making sure we're executing. And we came out in January with an increase in price, so the cost to build it was originally going to be 230 million, and that we announced it was going to be 270 million, and that's the headwinds that we saw in front of us in 2023. The Mexican peso appreciated 15%. We bought ourselves some insurance with buying an additional mobile fleet to make sure we sustain 2,000 tons per day. Steel prices increased. All that is now built into our projected or forecasted initial capex of $270 million. What's positive from our standpoint is we remain on track for commissioning in Q4 of 2024 this year. So from a productivity standpoint, we've been hitting our milestones. It's never linear. We have good days, we have our bad days, but we've had a lot of good days over the last 3 months. Our vertical construction is going well. Steel erection's close to half complete. Our ball mill, our SAG mill's in place. We're placing our crushers soon. Agitation tanks are in. The thickener tanks being welded up. So everything's going really well from that standpoint, knock on wood. From when you were there in November to what you went now, it's completely different. We'll have a Q1 construction update come out back half of April. Some updated video of site, like I say, with updated pictures. So the audience, I'd encourage them to see that and see how much happening. The tailings dam and lower platforms, a lot of work's happening there. Our critical path remains to be completion of our tailings dam and mine development. Mine development mainly get into a key ore body, a key specific area of the ore body, which is the plan, and it remains on track. So it's been good. Yeah, that's the date. All of it. All that has got steel and equipment on top of it now.
Yeah, none of that was there back a couple months ago. So it's great
Yeah.
to see how you guys have progressed there. A lot of work going into that.
Yeah, that reclaim tunnel's now complete. That's where our ball mill and SAG mill are actually sitting. We have steel all around that. If you look back towards that mountain there, that's where the crusher is going to be. You can see the reclaim tunnel, and that's all erected. So yeah, those are very dated photos now, Chris.
Well, I'll look forward to seeing the new
There
one.
you go. There's some steel going up. Like I say, that's done now.
And still on track, production in first quarter of 2025 is the plan?
Yeah, so commissioning is going to happen in Q4, and our expectations 2025 is going to be commercial production early Q1. We just have to execute, and we should be ready to go.
Yeah, and one other thing that I was hoping you could talk about, we discussed this back in November, but the cost of producing the silver at Terronera is certainly one of the features there, and I'll pull up the slide in the background, but certainly I think that's something people should be aware of going forward here.
Yeah, what makes Terronera special for us is that it's ultimately the cash flow, and it's 60% of the revenue comes from silver, 40% comes from gold. At $1,800 gold, the gold pays for all the silver production. So here we are sitting at 2350, 2375 gold. Cash flows after tax over the 10-year reserve life is close to $55 million. Using $23 silver, $1,800 gold at today's prices, you're approaching well north of $80 million of after-tax cash flow. So over the life of the project, we've got 10 years proven out. We expect to be here 15, 20, 25 years before it's all said and done. So Terronera is going to be a very special project for us, especially in today's price environment and a higher price environment, even better, of course. So we're excited. Of course, we've got to execute and get this thing in production for next year, and completely changes kind of the landscape of Endeavour Silver and what we've historically been. And allows us to further build. I mean, our goal is to be a senior silver producer. That's where we think kind of 25 million ounces of silver production or silver equivalents with gold. We have a project behind that called Pitarrilla. It's got 600 million ounces of silver in resources, plus zinc and lead, and we're looking at to move that along and move our development team from Terronera to Pitarrilla. So we have a nice pathway to get there, a nice pipeline to take advantage of the market that we've talked about today.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned in there, the 10-year life of mine at Terronera, and we'll get back to Pitarrilla in a second, but that's 4 million ounces of silver, 38,000 ounces a year of gold. If you do end up being able to extend that to the 25 years, more in that direction, how does that change those annual production numbers? Would you expect something similar in the years 11 to 25? How would that look?
Yeah, I mean, it's all speculation. We have inferred resources. As we get deeper into the ore body, the Terronera veins open along strike into depth. From a cost benefit standpoint, it doesn't make sense to start drilling that until we get there. So we'll be able to kind of help start defining that out. Because of the topography, you've been there, it's quite mountainous. We had to cut off the area. The plant scale right now is 2,000 tons per day. The expectation is if we continue to move on and add life, it would be eyeing 2,000 tons per day to be as efficient as possible through that plant. So the expectation would be similar production profile. Again, we have the La Luz vein. There's a number of veins that we've drilled out back in 2020, 21 with high mineralization, over 400 grams silver equivalents. Terronera is the main structure. It's 5.5 meters thick on average over that 10 years, shallow, again, open along strike into depth. 90% of that 10 years comes out of Terronera. It's like our other mines, Guanaceví, Bolañitos, we've been there 18 years, 17 years respectively. Never had more than 2-year reserve life. And epithermal vein systems, you can continue to come down. Sometimes they pinch out, but ultimately it's another bead on the necklace, so to speak. And there's work to be done. There'll be some exploration dollars to be spent, but lots of opportunity in the district. And if we can maintain that 2,000 tons per day, you're looking at a similar production profile, hopefully a similar cash flow profile. Just depends on the grades that you bring in.
Okay, and the other question I had, back to Pitarrilla, where you mentioned you have the 694 million ounce resource there. Any idea yet what the cost structure is going to be looking like at Pitarrilla?
Yeah, I don't want to say no idea yet because it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about. So we have a little bit of idea, but it's all still internal. Right now, we put out a resource. It is a historical resource that Silver Standard or SSR Mining ultimately put out. We confirmed all those numbers, put it out under 43-101, which is Canadian regulations of how we speak to this. We are drilling what we think are feeder veins into the deposit. And we're looking at this from an underground mine development standpoint. We're underground vein miners. That's what we know. That's what we understand in Mexico. And the rhetoric happening in Mexico is it's anti-open pit mining right now. AMLO's government, the Morena party, they've been in power now for 5.5 years. There's an election coming up in June. The expectation is Claudia Sheinbaum is to win that election. With the Moreno party getting back in, I'd be concerned that anti-open pit mining rhetoric will continue. So we're looking at it from an underground standpoint. In 2009, there was an underground pre-feasibility study completed by Silver Standard that was published. That was done at $11 silver. Cost profiles then to now significantly different, but we think this will be a low-cost mine, operating mine, because of the scale. It'd be about 3,000 to 4,000 tons per day. Grades, it's like I say, grades would run about 175 grams, 200 grams if you look at just the sulfides and contained into a vein system. So again, the volumes will be the key here. If we can be a 3,000, 4,000 ton per day operation, that will really drive down costs and make this a low-cost producing mine as well. Again, under the PFS that was published, Silver Standard had about 7 million ounces of silver plus zinc and lead per year. Again, that was at $11 silver when they put that study out. So world's completely changed. We got to get through that. We'll do an economic study in 2025 and hopefully have it published out next year.
Okay, well, always good to see that there's something else in the pipeline, even though I know we're still finishing up construction on number one, so we won't jump too far ahead. Well, the last one I had for you here is that after the construction of Terronera, you're looking at drop of all-in sustaining costs from about 22 down to 13. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, that what we've always said about Terronera is it effectively almost doubles our production and cuts our cost profile in half. And again, using the cash costs and all-in sustaining metrics that are byproduct credit basis, so the gold pays for the silver. The silver cash costs are negative at Terronera. All-in sustaining costs at these prices would be negative. So that's ultimately bringing that mine into production. It takes us from one of the higher cost producing companies to one of the lower cost producing companies. Again, why everybody's interested in Endeavour right now is the idea that if we can execute and get Terronera online, it completely changes our cash flow profile. Obviously, it makes a good investment when you have that type of cash flow behind the company.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it's really nice to see the way things are lining up. We'll see what the price of silver is and by the first quarter of 2025, but it's great to see you're doing what you have control over and bringing a low-cost mine on at the same time. All the other conditions we talked about are falling into place. So,
well, when we did the feasibility study and made the construction decision on Terronera, I mean, we estimated $17 silver price, I think $1,800 or $1,600 gold. So higher prices is only positive for the project. And you have foresight into that and kind of make those decisions going, okay, this is what it is. We'll make money at these prices, but what will the prices potentially look like? And I'm glad to know that we're hopefully bringing this mine into what's a bull market for silver and gold. And like I say, it'll set us up to do very well over the next couple of years. That's for sure.
Well, congratulations again on that. And Dan, can you just let folks know if they have questions? What is the best way to get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with us is probably through our website. We have a link that you can go to, get you in touch with our VP of IR and our IR team that will ultimately get back to you with any questions that you have. So by all means, we have a lot of data through our website about us. If you have any specific questions, you can go through our website to ask those.
Well, appreciate that. And again, we'll be keeping an eye on not only silver, but also the progress of the mine. And seems like you're on track for some good times ahead. And again, congratulations on having the timing go right in your favor as well. And it'll be fun to follow in the months ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for your time.